Welcome to the Dead Rite, where forgotten histories rise again. The first thing Leo noticed was the silence. It wasn't the gentle, pressurized hum of a cruising jetliner. It was a dead, total silence, the kind that pressed against his eardrums after a loud concert. He blinked, his head throbbing with a low-grade, persistent ache. The stale, recirculated air tasted of dust and something else, something metallic and old. He was in an airplane seat, the navy blue fabric worn thin at the edges. The cabin around him was dim, illuminated only by the pale, cold light of a few emergency strips along the floor and the muted glow of the moon through the oval windows. Every other light was dead. The LCD screens were dark, hollow eyes in the seatbacks. The call buttons, the reading lights, all inert. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket. No service. The time read 2:17 a.m. The date made no sense. It was the same day, but it should have been morning by now. They'd taken off from New York's JFK at 9 p.m. A 5-hour flight to Miami. He should be grabbing his carry-on, stiff-legged and eager to see his girlfriend, Sarah. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his consciousness. He looked around. The other passengers were still asleep. Or unconscious. They were slumped in their seats, unnaturally still. A man across the aisle had his head lolled back, mouth agape. A woman a few rows up was curled against the window, not moving. "Hello?" Leo's voice was a dry croak, swallowed by the dense silence. "Hey? Is anyone awake?" A soft groan came from the seat next to him. Chloe, the young woman he'd exchanged pleasantries with during takeoff, stirred. She was a graphic designer heading to a conference, she'd said. She blinked slowly, her eyes glazed with confusion. What's going on?" she mumbled, rubbing her temples. "Did we land? Why are the lights off?" "I don't know," Leo said, his own fear reflected in her widening eyes. "I just woke up. Something's wrong." One by one, others began to stir. A low chorus of confused murmurs and anxious questions filled the cabin, but it was muted, hushed, as if the darkness itself was absorbing the sound. A large man in a rumpled business suit, Leo remembered the flight attendant calling him Mr. Henderson, stood up, his voice booming with a forced authority. "All right, everyone, just stay calm. Probably just a power failure. Flight crew? Can we get some light in here?" There was no answer. The curtain separating the economy cabin from business class was drawn, a dark, heavy veil. The galley behind them was dark and empty. A young man in a hoodie, Ethan, had his face illuminated by his phone. "My phone's dead. Like, not out of battery, dead. Won't even turn on. My laptop too." Others began checking their devices, a wave of frantic confirmations following. Everything electronic was a useless brick. "Look outside," Chloe whispered, her hand gripping Leo's arm. Leo turned to the window. The moon was full and unnaturally bright, casting a silvery, clinical light over a seemingly endless sea of white. Clouds! They were nestled deep within a cloud bank, so thick it looked solid, like a frozen ocean. There was no sense of movement, no vibration from the engines. That was the second thing Leo noticed. The engines were silent. The profound, absolute lack of their roaring hum. A plane this size didn't glide in utter silence. It was impossible. They should be falling. "The engines," he said aloud. The cabin fell silent. Everyone listened. Nothing. Only the sound of their own ragged breathing. Henderson's bravado cracked. "That's not possible. This is a Dreamliner. It can't just glide like this." We should be plummeting. The word hung unspoken in the air. A scream erupted from the back of the cabin. It was short, sharp, and choked off abruptly. Everyone turned. An elderly woman was pointing a trembling finger at the window next to her seat. "It looked at me," she shrieked, her voice cracking with terror. "Something in the clouds looked at me." Her husband tried to calm her, calling her delirious, but the damage was done. A new, primal fear seeped into the cabin. It was no longer just a mechanical failure. It was something else. Leo, Chloe, Ethan, and a few others moved to her row. The window was cold to the touch. Leo peered out into the luminescent fog. For a moment, there was nothing but the swirling, milk-white vapor. Then, the clouds seemed to part. Something moved out there. Something vast. It was difficult to comprehend its shape, a suggestion of a membranous wing, a glimpse of a spined, segmented limb that tapered into the mist, pale and rotten. And in the brief gap, for a fraction of a second, he saw it. An eye. Massive, pupil-less, and glowing with the same sickly phosphorescence as the moon. It wasn't an eye of an animal. It was something ancient, intelligent, and utterly malevolent. It regarded the plane with a passive, predatory curiosity before the cloud swirled shut again. Leo stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He met Chloe's eyes. She had seen it too. Her face was bloodless. "We need to get to the cockpit," Henderson said, his voice shaking. He was trying to reclaim control, to focus on a tangible problem. Now. The group, Leo, Chloe, Ethan, Henderson, and a few other brave or terrified souls, agreed. They had to know. Moving down the aisle was like wading through a river of fear. Passengers reached out to them, grabbing at their clothes, begging for answers they didn't have. They pushed through the heavy curtain into business class. It was equally dark, equally still. The passengers here were also unconscious or asleep. But something was wrong. One man was sitting bolt upright, his eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. A thin trickle of black fluid seeped from his ear and down his neck. He didn't blink, didn't react to their presence. "Sir? Are you all right?" Henderson asked, nudging him. At the touch, the man's head slowly, mechanically, turned towards them. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a soft, static hiss, like an untuned radio, emanated from his throat. His eyes were not his own. They were clouded over, milky, and deep within that milkiness, Leo saw a flicker of the same phosphorescent light from the eye in the cloud. They backed away, a fresh wave of horror washing over them. The door to the cockpit was closed. Henderson knocked, then pounded. "Hello? Captain? Open up." There was no response. Ethan and Leo threw their shoulders against the reinforced door. It didn't budge. "The emergency axe," a flight attendant whispered. She was a petite woman named Anya, who had been hiding in the galley, paralyzed with fear. She pointed a trembling finger to a small panel on the wall with a red key lock. Henderson, using a key he found on a silent flight attendant slumped in a jump seat, opened it. He retrieved the small fire axe. With a few heavy blows, he hacked at the door around the lock until it splintered and gave way. The door swung inward. The cockpit was dark, the instrument panels dead. The windshield was a solid wall of white. The captain and first officer were still in their seats, harnessed. Their heads were tilted back. Their faces were frozen in silent screams, mouths stretched wide. Their eyes were gone. Not gouged out, but evaporated. From the empty sockets, faint tendrils of that same white mist curled and seeped, as if the cloud outside was slowly filling them up. Chloe vomited in the aisle. Leo felt the world tilt around him. This was beyond a crash. Beyond an accident. As they stared, the radio on the dead control panel crackled to life. Not with a voice, but with a distorted, screaming garble of sound, a chaotic mix of every language on Earth, crying, pleading, all played backwards and twisted into a single, agonized signal. Buried within the noise, a voice, clear and cold and impossibly ancient, spoke a single word in English. Mine. The radio died again. They retreated from the cockpit, sealing the broken door as best they could with a luggage strap. The truth was a cold stone in Leo's gut. They weren't flying. They were preserved. Trapped. This plane was a specimen jar, and they were the specimens. Back in the main cabin, the nightmare was evolving. The unnatural sleep was claiming more people. Those who remained awake huddled together, their whispers frantic. The man who had hissed static was now standing. He was moving stiffly down the aisle, his head twitching. The black fluid from his ear was now dripping from his fingertips. He reached out for a sleeping woman. "Stop!" Henderson yelled. The man turned. His mouth unhinged, opening far too wide, and a torrent of the black, tar-like substance poured out, splattering on the floor. It sizzled and began to move, coalescing into a shifting, many-legged shadow that skittered under the seats. Screams filled the cabin. The thing, the passenger, if he could still be called that, continued his advance. Ethan, acting on pure adrenaline, grabbed a wine bottle from her abandoned cart and smashed it over the man's head. The man didn't flinch. He simply turned and backhanded Ethan, sending him flying into the seats with a force that was not human. Bones cracked. The thing that had been a man began to change. His skin paled, taking on the texture of the cloud outside. His limbs elongated. The static hiss grew louder, now coming from several of the sleeping forms around them. They were waking up wrong. "We have to get out of here," Leo yelled. "Out where?" Chloe screamed back, clutching his arm. He didn't have an answer. The awakened passengers, the changed ones, were rising. They moved with a terrible, jerky synchronicity, their milky eyes fixed on the small group of still human survivors. They weren't attacking. They were gathering. Herding. The black, skittering things on the floor multiplied, flowing from the mouths of the changed. They were like living oil spills, absorbing light and sound. The survivors, about 15 of them, were forced backwards, towards the rear of the plane. There was nowhere to go. The galley was a dead end. The changed ones advanced, a silent, relentless wall of pale flesh and whispering static. In a moment of desperate clarity, Leo remembered the emergency door over the wing. It was madness. They were in the sky. But this wasn't the sky. This was somewhere else. Someone else. The wing, he shouted to Henderson and the others. The emergency exit. They fought their way to the port side exit, shoving aside seats and stumbling over the crawling darkness on the floor. The changed ones quickened their pace, their mouths opening in unison, emitting a frequency that made their teeth ache and their vision blur. Henderson and another man hauled on the emergency handle. With a great, explosive whump and a rush of screaming wind, the door was blown outwards. The cabin decompressed in an instant, papers, phones, and loose items sucked out into the void. But there was no void. Outside the door was not the raging sky they expected. There was silence. The cloud bank was solid, a rolling, luminous landscape. It looked like they could step out onto it. The wing of the plane was visible, extending into the mist, coated in a thin layer of glistening, frost-like rime. Below, the cloudscape was not uniform. Deep within its glowing layers, they could see things. Wreckage. The skeletal remains of other aircraft, a tri-motor plane with old-fashioned markings, a WWI-era fighter, the torn tail fin of a 1970s jetliner, all half-submerged and slowly being absorbed into the soft, glowing matter. This was a graveyard. A feeding ground. And moving through this graveyard were the shapes. The things they had glimpsed from the windows. They were vast, slow, and patient, moving through the clouds like whales through an ocean, their forms only partially visible, a cluster of eyes here, a barbed tentacle there, a glimpse of a cavernous maw. One of the survivors, a man driven mad by the sight, laughed hysterically and jumped. He didn't fall. He landed on the cloudy surface as if it were solid ground, his laughter cutting off abruptly as the mist beneath him liquefied and swallowed him whole with a soft, sighing sound. The changed ones were upon them. Henderson, buying time, turned to fight them with the fire axe. He was swarmed, the black substance flowing over him, silencing his screams. "We have to go," Leo yelled, grabbing Chloe's hand. "Where?" she cried, her voice torn away by the dead wind. "Anywhere but here." They jumped. Leo, Chloe, and Ethan were the only ones who made it. They landed on the cloudy surface. It held their weight, but it was soft and slightly warm, like walking on a giant, living lung. The air was thick and soupy, smelling of ozone and decay. Behind them, the changed one stood at the door of the plane, watching. Not following. Their work was done. The three survivors ran. They ran through the endless, glowing fog, past the ghostly wrecks of other lost vessels. The things in the mist did not pursue them. They were simply observed by those immense, passive eyes. They were insignificant. Escaped morsels from the larder. They ran until they could run no more, collapsing against the rusted hull of an old sailing ship, its mast broken, its sails turned to cobwebs of light. How long had it been here? Centuries? Ethan was badly hurt from his earlier impact, his breathing ragged. He slumped against the ship's wheel, which was fused with a crystalline growth. "This is it, isn't it?" he coughed. "We don't get to go home." Leo looked out into the eternal, silent white. There was no horizon. No sun. No stars. Only the mist and the things that called it home. "I don't think there is a home to go to anymore," Leo said softly. He thought of Sarah, waiting for him at the Miami airport, forever checking the arrivals board for a flight that would never come. A low, resonant tone began to hum through the mist, a sound that vibrated in their bones. It was a call. A summoning. The things around them began to stir, moving towards the source of the sound. In the distance, a new light appeared. Brighter. A portal? A way out? Hope, cruel and fleeting, sparked in Chloe's eyes. "There! Look!" They stumbled towards it, helping Ethan along. The light resolved into a familiar shape. An airplane, sitting pristine on the cloud bed. Its door was open, the steps down. A Boeing 707. Its silver fuselage gleamed. On its side, painted in cheerful, vintage lettering, was its flight number. Flight 914. It was their plane. Exactly as it was before it was taken. But newer. Untouched. Through the windows, they could see passengers moving about, a flight attendant in a 1960s-style uniform smiling, offering a tray of drinks. It was a perfect replica. A lure. The humming grew louder, more intense. It was coming from the plane. Ethan pulled back. "No. It's a trap. It's the same. But Chloe was mesmerized. It's a way back. It has to be. Maybe it's a loop. A second chance. She broke free from Leo's grasp and ran towards the inviting open door. Chloe, no. She reached the bottom of the steps and looked back at them, a smile of desperate relief on her face. Then she turned and walked up into the plane. The moment she crossed the threshold, the illusion shattered. The pristine plane flickered, and for a split second, Leo saw its true form, a grotesque, fleshy mockery of an aircraft, woven from sinew and bone and the screaming faces of all who had ever been taken. The open door was a mouth lined with teeth like shards of glass. Chloe's smile vanished, replaced by dawning horror as the fleshy steps retracted and the doormouth slammed shut. The plane's engine sputtered to life, not with the sound of turbines, but with a wet, choking gasp. The humming became a deafening, triumphant screech. The plane taxied slowly away from them, fading into the mist, its interior lights blinking once, twice, and then vanishing, taking Chloe with it. Leo sank to his knees. Ethan slumped beside him, his breathing growing fainter. They were alone in the silent, glowing hell. Time lost all meaning. Leo tended to Ethan until his breath stopped altogether, his body slowly sinking into the hungry, absorbing cloud. Leo was alone. He walked. He passed monuments to lost travel, a Roman galley, a hot air balloon basket, a shuttlecock-like thing he didn't recognize. He found a water bottle from his own plane, half dissolved. He found Chloe's conference pass, the plastic brittle and strange. He finally stopped walking when he saw the light ahead. Not a lure, but a rip in the fabric of this reality. A window. Through it, he could see a familiar tarmac, hangars, the lights of a control tower. A modern airport. He could see ground crew working, a fuel truck driving by. It was real. It was home. He ran towards it, sobs of relief choking him. He was almost there. He could see the moon in the real sky, a dull yellow compared to the cold orb of this place. As he reached the tear, he saw a sign on the nearest hangar. It read Miami International Airport. He was home. He thrust his hand through the opening, feeling the warm, humid air of Florida. And then he saw it. Parked at a gate, connected to a jetway, was a plane. Freshly painted, gleaming under the airport lights. Travelers were boarding. Flight 914. Non-stop service from New York to Miami. It was the same tail number. The same aircraft. The rip began to close, the image of home shrinking. He understood then. This wasn't an escape. It was a preview. A taunt. This thing, this intelligence, was cyclical. It fed, and then it reset, finding its lure anew. His plane hadn't been the first. It wouldn't be the last. He could have tried to jump through the closing rip. But to what end? To warn them? They'd never believe him. To stop the flight? It was already boarding. He pulled his hand back. The rip sealed shut, leaving him in the perpetual, silent white. He turned away from the empty space where home had been. He had a new purpose. Not escape. That was impossible. But perhaps observation. Witnessing. He found a high perch on the wreck of the old tri-motor plane and looked out over the cloudscape. In the distance, the familiar, sleek form of his own Dreamliner materialized, fresh and new, its windows bright, its passengers unknowing. The cycle was beginning again. And high above it all, one of the great, ancient things in the mist slowly turned its massive, phosphorescent eye. It didn't look at the new plane. It looked directly at Leo. It had known he was there all along. A feeling, Not a sound echoed in his mind, a thought that was not his own. Stay. Watch. You are part of the collection now. Leo sat down on the cold, living cloud. He watched the lights of Flight 914 blink twice. And he waited. Take care, meet the next video.